The original's up on the stage there. Yeah.
That's the new one, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and then I just finished like a counterpiece to it that's beside it with the butterflies. coming too.
Is the recording going to be available afterwards?
I believe so.
Sid's like, what? Yes. We've been promised. We've just moved over to YouTube because Facebook's been giving Sid grief with technical bumps. The suspense.
Getting like an insane amount of static from your mic.
Fine.
You want to check the connection?
Autumn's mic? Is it because it's clipped on the inside?
Like a few second delay as well.
Okay.
No, your audio's pretty good actually.
Yeah?
Is mine that's fussy?
Which one is it?
I think we're good.
Awesome.
Woohoo!
Look at us.
Yes,
Nice.
it.
God, I sweated that a little bit.
Well done.
Cool.
Okay,
Good to go.
Amazing.
we are live.
Hello.
Hello. Yay, and hello. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for coming. This is such a pleasure and an honor. And thank you, Sophia, for joining and for holding space and for your thrilling and inspiring and likely challenging questions you're going to present to me. So thank you. It's really a pleasure to share this space with you, and I
Likewise.
admire your work as well. So it's really nice to be art sisters, comrades, allies.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I'm honored to be here with you. You're such a huge inspiration for me. Your art has always been just an idea for me of what is possible. When you can really devote yourself to your craft like that and be able to translate your vision into form. So I'm stoked to chat with you today about that. And on the theme of vision, should we dive into the questions?
Let's dive.
Let's do it.
Art.
All right. So I'm curious, when did you first begin your journey as an artist? Is it something like that in your childhood you started to cultivate, or was there a pivotal moment that it really landed for you?
Well, it's always just been a focus for me. I'm very blessed to have a family that always supported it. It's a very creative family. And so from a really young age, my mom says before I could talk or walk, I was making pictures. And it's just always been my passion. I would be making art all day, and she would say, go outside, it's beautiful out. And so I'd grab my sketchbook and run outside and keep making art. And yeah, as I've grown up, and especially now in my teaching journey, it occurs to me how rare that is. To be uninhibited creatively as a child. There are so many ways that we're told not to make art by our peers, by our family, by our teachers, by our media. And yeah, so I consider that the greatest blessing of my life is that I was never told not to. And so now it's one of my greatest missions to help people move through those stories of not good enough and to be able to give themselves permission as well if they never had it before. So it's just continued to unfold and evolve, and so there's never a halt to that creative path. It's just always been continuous.
Beautiful. Wow, that's really special. So I'm curious, like today with your art, what is your biggest inspiration or message behind it, if you have one?
Well, the art process for me is very intuitive. It's I sometimes begin with a pretty completed concept or an idea that I want to explore or portray, but a lot of the time is actually just the seed of an idea, and it takes me on a journey and unfolds. And it seems even in the moment as I'm working, it sometimes feels like it's random or it's trivial or trite, and as it unfolds, or especially looking at it after, it really strikes me again and again at how poignant it is to my life or to what's going on in the world or in my community. It feels like it's always relevant, and sometimes it's more abstract, sometimes it's more overt, but it always seems like there's sort of a common thread that's woven through my pieces that echoes in my life and in many lives around me as it's reflected back and in the world at large too.
Beautiful. And that's kind of unique to each piece then, you would say?
Yeah.
Awesome.
And yeah, the themes might shift, and sometimes they become more narrative or more political, more commentary, or just more beautiful in celebration of life. But it seems like there's always something that the viewer can find their own reflection in. And so that's where really my inspiration comes from, is the ongoing outflowing of the art that flows through and then is reflected in the viewer. It's like the art is never finished because the story continues, right? Somebody else will come along and look at that and say, oh, it reminds me of this time, or to me it says this, and it continues to evolve. And so in all its various forms of stickers to the original, everything in between, it takes on its own story depending on who's looking at it. They're mirrors.
Beautiful. Yeah, and that continues for years with each one. Amazing. So I guess that almost answers my question, but when you envision a new piece of art, like what is the beginning process look like? How do you start a new piece?
It's always different. Sometimes it's in that moment of just drifting off to sleep. That point is called twilight reverie. That in itself is like the most beautiful. But that moment, it truly is this like moment of reverie, right, where a lot of our epiphanies can come. So I get ideas then. I get ideas, just glimpses in conversation or while driving. But really, most of my ideas come when I'm making art. So while I'm creating a painting, I always have my sketchbook next to me, and I take notes, and ideas come. It's like when you open that channel, things flow through. If you're sitting in front of a blank canvas like this, like, I don't know what to paint, nothing can move through you. So this is like, to me, the creative blocks are like a self-perpetuating myth. If you're sitting and you're all clogged up, we're a channel. We're like a tap faucet. And if we're not creating, it gets all gucky in there. And things just get built up. All these expectations and fears and all this weight gets stacked up, and it just builds more and more pressure, and it's harder and harder to let that creative passion through. And so my recommendation to anybody that's experiencing that is get it out, like creative spiritual Drano. Go to the beach and draw in the sand, get a piece of cardboard that is like got a picture of a TV and writing on the back, it's garbage. Get a piece of charcoal from the fire and just scribble, get your whole body involved, do something that you can just get your body moving and get that creative flow going, and something that is not precious. Like, don't take a brand new canvas and be like, I'm gonna just be free out of nowhere. It's probably just not gonna happen. There's nothing more terrifying than a blank canvas. Yes, and so if you can get that moving, then you'll find that you go back to your studio and you're looser and you're more refreshed and you have more permission. So just do it on newspaper and then burn it. Like,
Nice.
do something that you know you can't keep,
Yeah.
because it's really like on the window, you know, in the steam, like anything. Picasso has a great quote. He says, "Inspiration does exist, but it must find you working." And I really believe that. So this is where my ideas come from. It comes from creating art, and then I'm like, oh, new idea.
Nice.
You know, write it down later. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love that idea of having the sketchbook right there to just keep that, those impulses, those little gems that you find as you're working. Gorgeous. Oh. Gotta find our document.
Stay with us, iPad.
Uh-oh. There it is. Technical
Technology.
issues.
I can't even blame Mercury. Can we?
Sure. What has it been like live painting in events and in the festival scene? And I'm curious if that environment, as you're working, like affects the art or brings inspiration and new ideas into that space as well, and how that changes the process.
Yeah, it's fun. It's I think, you know, typically the archetype of the artist is the solitary, quiet, isolated figure, right? It's so much of the creative process, especially with songwriting, right? You do that. It's hard to write a song with somebody else in the room.
Yeah.
And with a painting, it can be like that. That, you know, it's nice to be quiet and alone and be able to be free, but it's also it's a beautiful, energizing experience to paint in public. And these festival experiences or concerts or seminars or wherever you find yourself in public, even like at the Saturday market or something like that, it's so fun because people that come by and explore and sit with you while you're painting, they're infused into it, even if they don't talk to you. There's some of them in it, and often people do strike up conversations. I love to ask, like, oh, what do you think should happen here? And it's amazing how we talk about like creative permission.
Yeah.
People, when I ask people what they think should be in a painting, I assure them, like, I'm not gonna just automatically do what you tell me to do, but I'd love to hear what you think. And people are just like, oh no, I could never. Like, people are so afraid to share their creative ideas, but with a little bit of coaxing, I've had some amazing input and amazing ideas that come through that. So I really enjoyed that. And a lot of my paintings actually start as live paintings. Like this one behind you that's a brand new piece, I started that at Earth Frequency in Australia. And you know, going into an event, I try to think, oh, what is the theme? It was in Australia right after the fires and the floods. And so it was feeling that extreme polarity of the fire and water. And I just wanted to speak to that without being, you know, overly dramatic with the symbolism or painting hundreds of animals in one painting in one weekend. I just wanted to play with that idea and see if I could bring more personal reflection of that symbolism and that relevance. And then I bring them home and I finish them in my studio. So they move very quickly at first, and this is why I like to start a painting at least try with a blank canvas, if not then just beginning, because people can see that, and many people have never experienced the creation of a painting. And it's something, it demystifies it a little bit. It doesn't take away any of the magic, but it takes away some mystery, and amazing how people can step away empowered by that. Like, wow, I feel like I just got a painting lesson just by watching. And they feel like in some way they have permission. It's that permission again of like, okay, it's just colorful mud on a piece of fabric. It's not that, like it doesn't happen instantly, but it happens fast at first, and that's really exciting to watch. It's the fiddly, like 300 hours of refinement and finessing that, you know, it's not that interesting to watch.
Amazing. I'm in love with that new piece of yours. Very much.
Thank you.
Have there been key painting techniques that have allowed you to feel like fully expressive in your capacity to have a vision and then be able to translate it into the art form and into paint? I'm curious if there's like specific techniques that have really empowered that.
I'm sure there is, and I'm still looking for them, honestly. Like every brush stroke is a teacher, everyone. And the act of teaching actually has taught me a lot about distilling my process down to a simplified, digestible form, and one that's approachable from people that have never even painted. Is really, it's been a good practice for me to like, okay, how can I articulate this? How can I break it down so that you can understand it, and building with lights and shadows. And so it's something that I'm constantly striving for. And people ask me for years if I taught, and I'd be like, I don't know what I'm doing, I just paint. But then if they would ask me a specific question, I could answer at length. And so just learning how to take that process that's become so intuitive for me and to make it tangible and approachable for people has taught me a great deal.
Wow.
So a lot of what it comes down to is light and shadow. You know, we're literally painting light and shadow, and it's so fascinating how the metaphor of that is something that weaves into the whole creative process, because with this painting process of light and shadow comes up our light and our shadow of our judgments and our pressure and our fear and our inhibitions, and then our hopes and our dreams and our self-talk and self-support and compassion and criticism and back and forth and back and forth. And anybody that's like sat in one of my courses, they're like, oh my God, I thought I was just coming to paint. I didn't realize I was like coming for like a full psychological reconstruct. It's a deep process, but it's a beautiful process, and it really teaches us about how we show up in the world. And so, yeah, it's all light and shadow, everything we do. But I'll talk about, like in the painting demo too, I'll get all technical and geek out on, you know, painting, mixing techniques and how to lay out your palette and how to, you know, chisel form, that kind of thing.
Sweet. I'm excited. I'm curious, what, like, in that meeting of the light and shadow, what do you envision for humanity as we move through these really turbulent, changing times? And especially, how does your art, or art in general, contribute to that vision's becoming?
I thought we were just here to talk about painting. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, well, it's very much, I think it's being willing to sit with both. I think it's light and shadow. It's not light's better than shadow, or, you know, one, it's always been this push and pull, and to me it's very much about balance, and that's what a lot of my work lately has been speaking to. And it seems like a lot of themes right now, there's so many polarizing forces and polarizing ideas, and so many ways that we can go to extremes, and it's so confusing. It's very confusing times that we're in, and it's easy to flip from one extreme to the other. And what, you know, this piece is about, and what I've been sitting with, is this balance point. It's this middle path, this middle way of witness to the extremes. It's a neutrality. It's not a numbing to both sides, but rather a witnessing of both. And I think that, you know, if we talk about the theme of balance, balance is a fluid state. If you're balancing on a tightrope, or you're like, a tree is strong because it's flexible. It can bend in the wind. And if you're walking on a boat, you're balanced because you're fluid.
Yes.
If the second you become rigid and say, no, I know what I need to stand in this direction, then you fall over. And so to me, I think right now and always, and in so many ways, it's like, find that balance of the masculine and feminine in ourselves, of like what's being called for in this point. It's like that balance point is always going to be shifting. Sometimes we need to stand up more, and sometimes we need to step back more, and sometimes we need to speak up, and sometimes we need to listen. And what is, like, just being able to be in that witness point, I think, is what's going to help heal this world and help us come together to solve some of these really big questions right now. It's like, what's being called, like, what is being called up through me or down through me to be able to show up? Do I need to be louder or quieter? It's, and just because I needed to be loud yesterday doesn't mean I need to be loud today. Maybe today I need to listen. And it's that listening, I think, to what needs to be. I don't know.
Yeah, the nuances.
Easier said than done.
Yeah.
But exciting times.
Definitely, definitely. What a gift.
Yeah.
There's a quote that I really love. It's by a beautiful Black artist, Toni Kate Bambara, and it's the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. And I'm curious, just whether that resonates with you and what your thoughts are on like this piece. It speaks to that balance point so beautifully, and as art can translate these messages and remind us of how we can show up and how we can best meet the moment and meet ourselves. Yeah, curious how that quote lands with you.
I like it. Yeah, make it irresistible. Well, I think that, the opportunity and the responsibility of artists of all kind is to offer mirrors and offer maps. Beautiful. You know, artists have always been map makers. They always speak to the times and speak to the ways forward. And a lot of you look through history, and a lot of that art has been transmutation of pain, and there's been a lot of pain, and there still is. We're seeing that in a lot of art, and you know, it's like a sad song is way easier to sell than a happy song, and at the same time, I think that there is an opportunity now to create maps of where we want to go, not just where we've been.
Yes.
And so I guess that irresistible, to make art or to make the revolution irresistible, is a lot of that is around beauty, I would say. To sort of interpret that through my own lens, I would say that make it beautiful. Make it so that somebody sees that and goes, oh, that feels nice. Even if it's challenging, like it can be like delicious looking and it can still be challenging and it can shake us to our core. But I feel like the important takeaway for that is to always point forward. Always infuse it with hope and with promise and with that forward momentum. So even if it's dealing, like some of my paintings deal with challenging subject matter, and even in those most disparative visions, I aim to bring hope, and I aim to bring that, like, the way forward, even if the way forward is through tears and grief. It's still moving through. I think, so I think beauty is the way.
I love that response. Last question. How does that feel for time? Yeah? Awesome. Do you have any words of wisdom for budding artists and those who want to paint their visions into form, continue to contribute to that beauty?
Paint.
Paint.
Yeah.
Keep that
had a great conversation with Kashi earlier today. Amazing, paintress, and we've chatted about this in the past, I believe, and I feel like the best way to learn to paint is to paint. There's no quick, easy fix. There's no magic pill that you can take, like in the Matrix, or you like plug in and all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, 10,000 hours, no problem. You really have to paint if you want to be, a technically good painter. That said, there's ways of gleaning information. Look at art, look at the masters, travel to the museums if you can. Otherwise, look online, get art books, go to the library, and observe how these masters have done it. Take workshops and learn techniques and ask questions, and then, put it aside and experiment and play. The greatest gift of art is that there's no wrong way. There's like signposts and guidelines, and did you know that if you mix red and purple together, or red and blue together, it makes purple, or if you mix black and white, it makes gray. Like, those are good technical things to know, but you can also break those rules and say, well, I'm going to actually mix opposite colors together and make like a really interesting brown color. And I'm gonna take this perspective and I'm gonna totally distort it. And that's where the great artists and inventors of history have had their greatest breakthroughs is through breaking rules.
Yeah.
You know, I don't believe that any great piece of art or any great invention was created by playing it safe. And you know, David Bowie talks about if you feel you're comfortable in one area, it means that you're too shallow in the pool. Like, go a little farther so that your toes are just barely not touching the bottom of the pool, and then you're where it gets juicy.
Yeah.
Right? Like, just find your edge and lean into it. I think that this is important, you know, as not just artists, as human beings walking in this world in this interesting times and trying to find our way forward. Is like, where's my edge? Is my edge having a peaceful conversation with somebody that has differing opinions? Is my edge having a conversation with someone when usually I hide away? What is that connection point? What is that place that I would have maybe stepped back in the past? And so art is like that. Take risks. And I'm constantly like asking myself, like, am I too comfortable? Like, maybe I need to do this. And even in my ways, like, yeah, sometimes I'm just like, wow, I'll just put like the red stripe across that. And like, oh no, I couldn't. Like, so I preach this, but I also like, yeah, it's scary to take risks, but not to forget that it's just colorful mud. It's just paint. You know, there's like these polarizing truths of like I really like paradoxes, and it's like this paradox of art is like, you know, it's just making pictures. It's just like there's people out in the world like delivering babies in the desert, and like there's amazing like very important things happening, and like saving like the guy that's cleaning up the ocean with the machine that's taking all the plastic. Like those are big things. So it's easy to look at this like little piece of canvas and be like, yeah, it's just a picture. I'm just making a picture. It's like trivial. It's just me making a pretty little mess on a piece of fabric. And it has the capacity to transform your life.
Yeah.
It has the capacity to empower you to actually walk a little taller in your life because you made something. Or it has the capacity to empower the person sitting next to you to make something, or that they're gonna find their own reflection in that and have a transformative experience. Like, it's meaningless and it's the most important thing you can do all at the same time. So find your balance point. Like, do I need to take this a little bit more seriously and sit back down at the easel and work a little harder at this in this moment? Or do I need to take it a little less serious and like give myself a pat on the back and say, don't worry about it, just make a little mess, or like, you're pushing too hard, go have an apple or something. Like, find your balance within that paradox that both extremes are true, and what's gonna serve you in this moment. Show up harder or back off a little softer. Like
that dance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's always gonna be different.
Yeah.
There's a great quote by Julia Cameron, who wrote The Artist's Way.
Yes.
And she said, I take care of the quantity, God takes care of the quality.
Beautiful.
And I love that. It's all you can do is show up and get out of the way.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Great question. Thank you. Yeah. So we are far from finished. I would love to hear one of your songs. It would be such a pleasure and an honor to hear you sing. Sophia is an amazing songstress.
Thank you.
And while she does that, I'm going to set up my painting, and then we're going to talk about painting. And we'll have lots more opportunities for some questions from you fabulous folks and you fabulous folks. So if you have any questions, please get the attention of one of these two, Tessa or Neo. Or if you're online, you can post a comment on the
Either the YouTube link, or if they don't have a YouTube account, there's a spot on the Facebook page.
Okay, either on the Facebook page or on the YouTube link. So yeah, bring your questions out, and then I'm going to also talk about the creative process through painting and get messy with some mud.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to share a song I just learned. different horizon. Thank you.
Oh, we don't? I was just about to say something super deep. I lost it. I truly believe that that art and music come from the same place, and same with cooking and dancing and all of these channeled arts. It's just different channels that they come through, different faucets. I think of each of us as like, you know those bags with the little nozzles that you put icing into and you squeeze onto cakes? It's like a cake fluter thing. It's got some fancy name, I don't know. But anyways, I think we're all those fancy bags with our unique end, that the same icing, the same sweet inspiration nectar comes through, but in our own unique shape. And so it doesn't matter what way your hand moves. Only you can move your hand like that, and only you can move your body like that, and only you can sing like that. It's absolutely unique to you, but it's the same icing. That's just amuses me to no end and delights me. There you go. Deep, right? Icing. So, painting. Painting teaches me how I want to walk in the world, and it's constantly schooling me and inspiring me and empowering me and humbling me and just inspiring me of how to live in a balanced way, how to show up and do my best, how to trust in the process, how to not worry so much, it's all gonna work out, but how to keep showing up and doing my best. Like, you know, thinking of like the 4 agreements of don't take it so personally, don't worry about it. Like, we have these ideas of what that painting is gonna look like. And we get really hung up on what that painting is gonna look like. By the time it's 35, it should have a white picket fence and 2.5 kids. And you know, what is the painting of our life gonna look like? And then when it inevitably doesn't look like that, we think we've failed. So we go to the museum, we see art, and we think, that's what art looks like. That's what correct, good art looks like. And then we have this amazing vision or dream or experience, and we want to translate it. And so we get out our sketchbook, all like excited and inspired, and we start with a line, and it's like, and it never looks like that. And we think, okay, well, it doesn't look like the museum. Failed. I suck. I'm not good at art. It's wrong. Instead of actually listening and saying, oh, well, maybe my style is surprising to me. Maybe it looks totally different than I think it's going to look. And really just trusting that your hand is moving. It's guided by your spirit. And that amazing icing is flowing through you in a unique and precious way. So really just being patient with that, and also acknowledging the fact that painting takes a lot of time. You just gotta be in it for the long haul. Like, unless you're an abstract experimental minimalist, that's cool. Like, there's a lot of different ways to paint and a lot of ways that it can show up and be amazing and moving. But if you want any form of realism and detail, then especially if you have like some transformational spiritual experience and you're like, it was fractals and it was like, there was all the animals and all the guardians and all the things. And it's like, sometimes these are really elaborate experiences that you want to translate. You're gonna, even if you have all of the animals in your yard, it's gonna take you a while. So just like, be patient. It's gonna take hundreds of hours. It's for the long haul. It doesn't happen instantly. So like maybe start with like, okay, well it had a cat in it, not all the cats. And it had a budgie, it wasn't all the bird kingdom. Like just simplify. And you might get there faster a little bit. Okay. What was I talking about? Art. Okay, so I am up here fiddling with my brushes. So let's talk about brushes. I'm gonna get like really like geeky, technical, talk about some stuff, because I know that there's a lot of painters here, there's a lot of painters right there, and we love to paint, so we love to talk about our geeky painty things. I really like white nylon brushes. I like short handles because I don't want to have to like poke myself in the face with the long handles. I tend to get in there like this. It's not very good for my posture, but it's great for my eyesight. And I find that the long handles just get in the way. Sometimes I even snip off the ends if I can only get long-handled ones. But you might like long-handled, especially if you're an oil painter and you don't want to get close to all the stink. Or if you just like to do the sort of like Bob Rossi type thing. Yeah. So I like the short handles. Anyways, white nylon I find is nice. It's a nice balance between rigid and soft. Balance. I'm going to talk about balance a lot, just get used to it. And then rounds. So I have a number of varying sizes of these white nylon brushes. These are not expensive brushes. They are from the art supply store. They might range between, this might be like a $9 brush. This is probably like a $4.50, you know, $3.95. Not expensive, but it does add up. It's hard to walk into an art supply store without dropping a couple $100, as you probably know. So take care of your tools. I'm gonna say that. I'm still learning that, evidently, as you can tell if you zoom in on that super gross paint packed in here. Okay.
We know the audio's bad.
Okay. Do you want me to just do that?
Can you switch your mic with her?
Yeah, this is gold. You don't want to miss this. Yeah. So take care of your brushes. Take care of your tools. Thank you. Oh. Fab. Yes, take care. Take care of your microphone cable. Take care of your posture. So your most important tool, as much as brushes are important, most important tool is your body. Take care of your body. Adjust your canvas so your back is straight and you're working at eye level, all that jazz. Drink water, get lots of sleep, eat good food. You know, that kind of thing. Go outside, as my mom would say. So, yeah, clean your brushes. Don't leave them sitting in the water if they're pointy, like that. Let them dry flat so that you don't let them dry like this and all the like lazy paint water gets inside and makes them go like that. But when they do inevitably get frayed, they're just as useful. They get like these fuzzy things, which are really good dabbers, and we're going to talk about that. Okay. Palettes are also great. As great as dinner plates are, they're not that great. Palettes are going to save you a lot of dinner plates and a lot of paint. And these palettes I really cannot recommend enough. This is Masterson brand. I'm not sponsored by them, but I really should be. Hear that, Mastersons? Get that. These are Stay Wet palettes. It's like a Tupperware, also not sponsored by Tupperware. And inside is a cellulose sponge and these pages of acrylic porous paper that when you saturate, allows the water to wick up through into the bottom of the paint and keeps your paint wet far longer than smells good. So yeah, they get pretty funky, but it's awesome. It's gonna save you a lot of paint, and if you only have half an hour to paint, you can just open your palette and all your paint's right there, and they're just the best things. So yeah, I let mine go. Like, they get pretty funky, but they're great, and you can always just change out the paper, and it just makes it easier to color match, easier to mix your colors, especially if you're sitting outside and painting. It can just really simplify the whole process. For paints, I'm really into these golden fluids. They're the nice consistency of maple syrup, as opposed to a lot of the tube acrylics are like the consistency of peanut butter. So if you can think of like, unless you're painting like really alla prima thick textured paint, peanut butter is great for that. But if you want to, I paint in very, very thin layers and I build them up gradually, and therefore maple syrup is awesome. So these fluids are already at that nice consistency that's very workable. Totally recommend them. Golden is awesome. Paints are probably the most important thing that you actually invest in. So quality-wise, treat yourself to nice paints. Working with quality pigments is going to make all the difference when it comes to mixing colors. Paint brushes, you know, you can use your finger, you can use the back of a stick, you can use a number of things. Having a nice quality paintbrush it's like playing guitar on a nice guitar or on a crappy guitar. You know, if you're a guitar player, you can make any beautiful music even on an old beater guitar. But it's not as important as the paints. And surface is, you can paint literally on anything as long as it's clean and dry. So it's not as important, though it is lovely to paint on a triple primed linen canvas. That's good too. So when you lay out your palette, I recommend laying it out on the outer perimeter so you have the center place to mix your colors. And remember, it's like a smorgasbord. You can always go back for more. And try not to overstuff yourself. I'm just going to put them there. I'm not going to, they get really juicy, so I'm going to like show you fast so it doesn't slop everywhere. But that's going to give a nice big area to mix my colors. So because this is a pretty short painting demonstration, and I've already been talking for a really long time and not actually got my paintbrush dirty yet, I figured I would take a painting forward enough that I can demonstrate a few different phases of the creative process. So behind me, you will see this painting I started the other night, and you can see 3 distinct different phases that these faces are in. This is my lovely friend Indy and her 2 sisters that graciously granted me permission to paint them, and it felt like it was a really appropriate, not only for the theme of this time of upholding each other and balance and cooperation and mutual respect, but it also gave me this opportunity to paint 3 different levels of completion. So in this first level, I've blocked it in. This is a point where it's like a posterizing. When you look at an object or you look at a picture, and if you had to make a decision of a perimeter, a border where you're going to draw the shadow and the light, where would you draw that border? So if you've ever worked on Photoshop and you've put on the posterizing effect, or if you're familiar with spray paint stencil graffiti, like Banksy, or these people that like cut out a stencil and then spray paint, and it's just black and white or 2 different tones, and it creates a very realistic picture. That's what we're doing here. We're simplifying, and we're just looking for big picture, big shapes, big triangles, big squares, like what is that shape? What are their relationships with each other? Then we get into smaller shapes. So at the beginning here, I'd probably work with this size brush. If you can work with as large of a paintbrush as possible, as late into the painting as possible, this is going to really help you move forward faster, as well as it's going to help you retain the big picture without getting caught into the nuances. Like we all want to get in there and paint eyelashes right away, but don't. Like if you can really resist the detail of like the little creases in the lips until you have that big picture, it's going to make it a lot more realistic. So be patient with that and build. Think of it as like making a big sculpture. So you've got this block of wood, right? You're not going to go in there with chisels and just start like whittling away trying to carve a shape out of that block of wood. You're going to get in there with a chainsaw and just carve big swabs. So that's what this is doing. We're chainsaw carving. We're just like taking big chunks, big picture. Then we get in there with maybe the little saws or the little rasps. We get like chisel, next size down. So I'd move to a smaller brush. And then we get into like the smaller little blades and really start to nuance that and that's when we get into the details, and then we paint it. So I'm also starting with black and white. Well, in this case, this is a raw umber and titanium white. And this is going to help the process of seeing light and shadow without getting caught up on warm and cool and like all the differences between them. And the yellows, is this like slightly green over here? And is it just by association or is it actually green? So we're not going to even worry about that. We're just going to work on light and shadow, black and white, basically. Okay? So in order to mix those, I'm just going to work into the middle of the palette here and mix like a nice neutral mid-tone. I'm working with general lights to general shadows. This is general to specific rule. We're going to get more and more specific as we work. And one of the things, there's a couple agonizing things about acrylic if you've worked with acrylic before. One is that it's acrylic, so it dries super fast. And if you've transitioned from oil paints into acrylic, you're probably like, this is the most annoying thing in the world. Why won't it just be oil paints? And you're fighting it and wanting it to be oil paints. It's never going to be oil paints. Celebrate it. It dries fast. It's awesome. So it just means that you have to work more deliberately, and you work more general to specific, and you can build up these very, very smooth gradations over time. It does not happen in the first pass. We're not working wet paint into wet paint to create subtle variations. We're working big, distinct lines. So if I'm now bringing, I'm going to tape up my reference here of these lovely women. If you're working from a reference, and if you're at all going for realism, work from reference. I really believe in reference. Take your own photographs if you can, or if you can't, change them enough that it doesn't look like the photograph. This is an opportunity, though, to see what anatomy is, what light and shadow is as it falls over top of that anatomy, and to not take for granted, oh, I know what a nose looks like. It's like an upside down mushroom. No, it's a shape and it's got folds, and we need to look at how it curves around and how it interacts with the cheek. And so if we can just trust our reference, it's going to help us get a lot more realism. If you are familiar at all with those performance painters that go on like The Tonight Show, and he's got this massive canvas and he's just like paint, 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 sloppy. And then in like 5 minutes he spins it around and it's like Leonard Cohen, like perfect. It's because he's memorized those shapes of exactly what triangle or what rectangle, all those shapes he knows. He's mapped it out. He's painted that probably so many times that he knows exactly what shape goes to into what place. It's not that he's like thinking, I'm painting Leonard Cohen. He's literally painting like big triangle cheek and carrying on. So that's what I'm looking for here. Okay, as I've blocked in this, it's like actually a very smooth gradation across the forehead here, but I had to make a decision of where that border between general light and general shadow is going to go. So now I can go in with a third tone and actually get a little bit more specific. I don't need to blend these edges. I'm just blocking it in. And now I'm at a point too where I'm actually bridging them. And I'm looking for a little bit more subtlety, but still very general. So another one of the most annoying things about acrylics is that they dry slightly darker than when they're wet. So I need to accommodate for that when I'm mixing my colors. And if you can just remember that and be patient with that and cut yourself and it's some slack, it's going to save you a lot of headache. So I'm mixing my color actually slightly lighter than I want it, knowing that it's going to dry approximately a shade darker. And I'm just looking very consistently at the reference and translating those shapes onto the canvas. I don't know exactly what her neck looks like here because it goes off the frame, so I might need to take another reference photo just to get a neck. So I'm just trusting it. I'm looking for shapes for big pictures. they say when you're doing life drawing, like if you're sitting with a model and you're drawing, you should be looking at the model 80% of the time and at your paper 20% of the time. So not that you should do that when you're painting, but that gives you an idea of how important it is to look at the reference. So just keep checking it. And all the way through, never take for granted, oh, I know what a nose looks like, or I know what eyelids look like. You know, you do to a certain extent, and the more you paint them, the more you'll know them. But still, every circumstance is going to be different, and every lighting scenario is going to fall differently on every figure. So you never truly know what's going to happen. And that's why reference is important if you're going for realism. If you're not going for realism, then by all means, like, stretch the form and have fun with it. However, you'll know, if you look at art history, so many of, like, even the Cubists, even Picasso, Monet, like, these guys, like, they started as realist painters. And they learned the rules, and then they broke them. It's hard to break rules if you don't know them, right? So learn them first, and then you learn how to deviate from them. I didn't just condone anarchy, but, you know. Know your rights. So you can see how that subtlety can be accomplished just with big brush strokes and getting more and more specific. So I see here, I went a little bit far into the nose, and if I look at the reference, actually that highlight goes farther out. Okay? And I've done that to quite an extent here, but this is still considered blocked in. So I've bridged some of these. These bridges are like, you know, if you think of a bridge, it goes from one side of a river to another. It has to go on the land and span the river and hit the other land. So it's not just running down this, arbitrarily running down this line here. It's actually going over top of some of the light and over top of some of the shadow and creating an intermediary field. So as I'm noodling on this and getting more and more finessed, I'll move over to this one a little bit too, and then I'm going to show some glazing techniques on here. I can invite some questions. Yay?
So we'll just ask you the questions if you can repeat the questions.
I will repeat the questions. Yes.
Did you use a grid to make that?
This, I used a very basic grid, so thank you. So Michaela asked, did I use a grid to make this painting? Grid is a form of transferring the image or the drawing to the canvas. And there's a number of different ways to do that, ranging from winging it eyeball style, like I'm just drawing what I'm seeing, all the way through projecting or tracing. This one, I used a grid. So gridding is somewhere in between. You're drawing reference points. You can go as tight of a grid as you want. The tighter you go with your squares, as long as they're square, you can do a square this big and translate it to a square this big on the side of a building. You can translate pictures just by getting reference points of this grid. And the smaller your grid is, the more information you're going to have. So yes, this one, and they were about this big. Yeah, so it's a good way to still learn by eye, but because there are so many ways, and everybody has an opinion on what they consider cheating or what they consider noble, and everywhere in between. So, you know, like some portrait painters that work digitally literally paint over top of a photograph digitally and then delete the underlayer. And by all means, you do what you want. Like, that is totally okay. Use the technology at hand. However, I do recommend honing your skills. Beware of crutches. You know, if we always walk with a crutch, our leg will atrophy, and then we won't actually be able to stand up on our own. So if you're just beginning, there's no replacement for learning the art of drawing and learning hand-eye coordinations and how to transfer an image that you see through you and onto your canvas. So find what works for you. Only you are the judge of what is within or outside of your own conscience and your own noble, creative being. So there's, yeah, but grid is a good halfway point. Yeah, thank you for that question, Michaela. Any other questions in this moment? Yeah.
Do your paintings always start in black and white and then have color added in, or is that like the recommended way to start with acrylic? Or?
So the question was, do my paintings always start in black and white, or do they sometimes, do I add in color initially?
Yeah.
I actually started working in the black and white when I started teaching, because in my first couple workshops, I was teaching right into color, and people that had never painted before were getting so hung up on the warms and cools that it became distracting. And so I had this idea to work, and it's raw umber and white, so it is a warm sort of neutral gray. And that actually is now the way I work. So most of my paintings, I do that way now. And actually, if you look at your skin, there's a lot of gray in it. It's sort of the most important color in skin for realism. And then you'll see when we start to glaze in a little bit of color on top of here, it actually gives a lot more realism, a lot more lifelike quality to the skin, where you can see the transparencies through. So I definitely recommend it. And it's just a really good practice to see light and shadow. Yeah. If you're painting, say you're painting a red rose, you don't need to paint a black and white rose and then glaze red in on top. But I would recommend starting with a more neutral red. Start with like a grayed version, where mix a little bit of white and a little bit of black in, or a little bit of blue and a little bit of white to gray out that red. And then you can glaze in your super hyper saturated colors, and they can be all the more effective.
So more for like skin and
Skin that I go right for the gray. But even, yeah, overall I generally paint, like her fabric here, I painted in sort of like, this part was sort of a bluer gray, and this was sort of a redder gray, but they were still both gray. Yeah. And same here. All three scarves they were all in gray, and then I glazed those colors in. So it's a really helpful tool for sure. Makes the colors more luminous too. Do we have any online questions?
Got a couple from your lovely Patreon members.
Oh, great.
From Serenity Meg. She says, I'm curious when and how you come to the visions of your paintings. And I guess she's got a second one, so why don't you start with, I'm curious where and how you come to the visions of your paintings.
Okay. So the question, where and how do I come to the visions of my paintings? And this is from Serenity Meg, who's one of my Patreon members. Okay, where and how? Well, as Sophia and I discussed, it's very much born of a seed. And sometimes those seeds come in my dream space, sometimes they come in conversations, sometimes they come while I'm driving, they come always at different times, but most often they come while I'm making art. And really just spontaneously. It's, sketching is a good way. It's like that creative Drano. So getting down and painting little sketches. And, but yeah, it just sort of, they just come. And then ideas change. Like, I didn't know what she was gonna be. I thought she was gonna be hugging like a childlike monster. I was like, that'd be weird and cool. But it's a bear. Okay, so it comes, and I didn't know that this was gonna be a three-headed figure. I thought it was just gonna be a single grandfather figure. It's all, ideas come, and sometimes it's very surprising as I work, and it just feels right. And sometimes that feeling of rightness is only slightly louder than the feeling of like, holy crap, I've got to undo a whole lot of work to do that. Because sometimes those, I call it marching orders, I get like my marching orders of, okay, that feels right, even though it means that I'm gonna have to paint over something that I just spent a week on. And sometimes it's true. But nothing's lost. I'm always moving forward in that. Even if you cover up something, even if you mess it up and you end up burning that painting, nothing's lost. We're always moving forward. We're always learning, we're always growing. The next painting will be better, don't worry about it. So it's just this onward trudging. Yeah, was there a second part to that question?
Well, we can move on to James in France.
Okay.
He's another Patreon member. This is an interesting one. If the genesis of each brushstroke is an inspiration, where does it occur in your body?
Okay, James in France. one of my Patreon. If the genesis of each brushstroke is an inspiration, where in your body does it occur? Or where does it occur in your body? Wow. I think, yeah, what he means is, what does it feel like to be me painting? Feels really good. Yeah, it feels really good. Feels really like alive. And sometimes I think, I'm too tired to paint. I'm like, But no, I'll just go up. You know, they say the hardest part of doing yoga is stepping on the mat, right? Does anybody disagree with that? It's so hard to just like unroll it and get on it. And then the rest is easy. And painting is the same way. It's like sometimes just dipping your paintbrush, especially as it dries, dipping your paintbrush in the paint is the hardest part. And then the energy flows. And I just wake up and I paint, and 15 hours goes by. It's like, it's a blissful state. It's this like, you know, and sometimes I'm thinking about other things, or I'm having conversations, or I'm listening to music, or I'm listening to podcasts, and it's sort of like a no mind space of just like, nice hum. Because a lot of it is just a serious show up, do the work, dedication, hundreds of hours. Sometimes it's tedious. Sometimes it's super annoying. But it's always a step forward. You know, every brush stroke that I lay down is one brush stroke farther on the journey. So I just have to keep on showing up. And it's sometimes I like start painting water drops, or start refining feathers on 12 doves or something. And I think, oh gosh, what have I done? I've like just made 300 hours of work by this one whimsical decision to include 12 doves in this painting. Like, why not one? Why a dove? Like, just simplicity. So yeah, there's like a lot of this talk that's going on in my mind sometimes, and other times it's just like, and sometimes it's singing. But it always feels good. It's just like, it's my happy place. I love to paint. It's just like my absolute joy. And when I see other people like invigorated with the spirit of like, when I'm teaching and the students are like been painting all day, and then they're up until like 3 in the morning painting all night, like, and I'm right there with them a lot of the time. I have to force myself to go to bed, but it's like, it's so fun. It feels so good. And it occurs, like, where does it occur in my body? It's like all through me. But you know, maybe the tip of the spear, the nexus point, the like laser point would be my hands. And that's just the farthest, most forward connection to my paintbrush, which is connected to my painting. So I do find that sometimes if I've been painting a lot and I step away, there's like a lot of energy in my fingers, and I'm just like, let me add something creative. Like, I do get that. Like, I get this sort of like, somebody asked me like, what is it like to have like a creative passion? What does that feel like? I was like, because she was trying to understand her husband better. And I was like, wow, it's actually like having like a low level, sweet anxiety all the time. Like, all the time. I've had it since I can remember, since I was like 2 years old, of like, I'm here on a mission. Like, I've never wavered from this like deep inner, like guttural urge to make art. And it's never gone away, and I don't believe that it ever will. Like, they pull me into the bank manager's office when I go to the bank, and they're like, hello, Miss Morrison, we just want to talk to you about your retirement plan. I'm like, I'm not retired, what are you talking about? Like, I'm gonna paint and paint. And this is why I believe in taking care of your body. This is why I believe in like drinking water and eating good food and getting lots of sleep and sitting up straight, even though I'm still working on that. But like, take care of your most important tools, because you wanna, like, this is the one you got. And I wanna paint until the day I die. I wanna paint long, and I plan on living a long time. And I have so many more paintings that are like just jostling and elbowing forward to come out. So I need to take care and get to work. And yeah, so it's like, you know, it's both like really peaceful and really yummy and fun and awesome, and it's like a lot of energy to have coursing through, not coursing, coursing through. It's, yeah. Is that hand, brain, heart? It's like, people are like, wow, that comes out of you? I'm like, no, it comes through. So I truly believe that the better my art is, the less I can take credit for it. It's like, if you're moved by a piece of art or music or by a food or some dance performance, that is because that person has gotten out of the way. They have honed their craft enough that they don't have to think about counting their steps or how many teaspoons of cinnamon to add to the cake. They know and they feel it. And this is how the place that I'm striving towards, and any painter, any musician, any creative being is striving towards, is that place of full surrender into the mastery that they know that they don't have to think about. So if you're moved by a piece of art, it's because something moved through the artist, and now you're seeing yourself in it, and something's moving through you. This is all a movement of energy and inspiration. So it's really a surrender point. And this is like the samadhi. This is the no-mind place. This is that place like that you just are moving on the dance floor and you didn't even know your body could bend like that. That's that place that we're striving for. Yeah. I don't know if that totally answers the question, but it's close, right? Okay. So yeah, painting. So at any point, if someone has a question, you can call it out. Don't get all crazy, you know. We have a couple more from on YouTube. Awesome. Okay, call them out. And I'm going to keep on painting so that I can show you a little bit of progress here. And just keep in mind, I'm doing the same thing that I've been talking about, only I'm going to start working into smaller and smaller fields, shapes. I'm not going to be blending wet into wet until I get tiny little areas that I can actually work in a quick way. But I'm still just blocking in and bridging those fields. So I'm going to keep doing that while I answer the questions, but I'm going to make less eye contact so that I can keep working. All right, let's hear it.
What is the role of visionary art in these trying times?
What is the role of visionary art in these trying times? Yeah. Well, the term visionary art is an interesting topic in itself, in that all art, I believe, is visionary, in that we are creating visions out of nothingness, which is pretty neat. But more specifically, the movement of visionary art as an art genre is sort of the spiritual, related to magic realism, surrealism, psychedelic art. Yeah, so what is the role of it? Well, as I mentioned before, I believe that artwork can be maps. It can be maps forward on our path. And so I believe that one of the most common themes of visionary art is that it speaks with the language of light. And like I was talking about with hope, I believe that the common thread of hope as a theme and a topic is the greatest service that it can offer to humanity. It's, there's no end of pain. There's no end of challenging topics, challenging imagery, information, stories. It is such a, and people argue that, well, it's always been like that, just now we have access to the internet, and so the information is getting out there. And regardless, we do have access to it, and it's overwhelming, and I know that there's a place of overwhelm for a lot of people to navigate these times and to keep our heads above water and to feel like there's hope, and how do we make a difference in the world? These problems are so big.
And then we have a garden for the first time this summer, and we think, oh, actually, maybe the problem's not that big. Like maybe it's big, but it's simple as well. And we're like slowing down or smiling at strangers on the street and knowing that we're all on this journey parallel. We might not be experiencing the same things, but we're all on the same road, and there's hope in that, and hope in connection, and I think that, yeah, visionary art has always been sort of that forward-pointing map and translating these unknown realms of experience or feeling into visual form. You know, a lot of people have these otherworldly or spiritual experiences and they can't articulate them, or they haven't had those experiences until they step in front of a painting, and then they feel it truly in their body. And yeah, it's just a piece of the puzzle. I think it's an important piece. But it's as important as, you know, the gardeners and the music makers and the midwives and the mamas and the papas and it's all just pieces of the puzzle. I don't know. That's a big question. I don't know if I answered it, but it's an interesting thing to muse on. Well, yeah, we do what we can. You know, like there's so many problems. There's so many directions that we can look and so many different directions that we can take. It's hard to know what to do to help. It's impossible to know. And the only thing I can come back to, like I've been sitting, like I have a sticker, it says respect your elders, right? It's got trees on it, it's a bumper sticker, and I drew that when there was a protest happening in my town, when they were logging sort of the forest heart of the town, where a lot of people walk, and they've walked for generations, this beautiful paths, like the town sort of goes around this gorgeous forest. And there was a protest happening downtown, and I thought, oh man, I should go to that protest. I should get in my car and drive for 20 minutes to go to the protest. But that didn't feel moving to me. That didn't feel inspiring or motivated. It felt like I should do this. And I thought, no, actually, the best thing that I can do to help this cause is to act on this little idea I had a while ago and to bring that into fruition. So I sat in my yard listening to the birds and distant chainsaws from my neighbor and drew this bumper sticker of trees from all over the world that says respect your elders. And then I donated all the profits for a couple years to this conservation fund. And that to me felt like my form of activism. Like that was a way that I could make a difference, more than marching down the street and yelling. And like I'm grateful to those people. If that's what inspires you, then do that. And to know that each one of us is a puzzle piece, and there's different ways that we can take action and different ways that we can have effect. And that sticker has been one of my best-selling, most internationally sold items. Like it goes all over the world from my online sales, and it strikes people, and people, like I see it driving in Vancouver or in California, and it's like on people's bumpers. So it's like, it had a bigger effect than me getting in my car and driving, maybe, I don't know, because I didn't do that. I wasn't inspired. And so just to really like act on your inspiration, I think, like what feels like the most inspiring thing to do in each moment. Sometimes you gotta like do your taxes or whatever. It's not inspiring. But what feels like the most inspiring thing to do in most moments, and to trust that if you are listening to something bigger than yourself, you will be not led astray. You will have effect farther than you realize, and it's worth it. It's worthy. You're worthy. You're valid, no matter what you do. Even if you stay home and take a nap, it's still okay, I think. I think we need to, it's so interesting. We need to simultaneously work harder and cut ourselves slack. And I don't know which statement is truer for each one of you or for myself in this moment of like, where do we need to work harder? Where do we need to work or not work as hard? I don't know. But yeah. So you can see, it's like starting to take more form. I'm getting more into the subtleties, and I've just sort of been going over areas. Now I'm getting into a smaller brush, and I'm just sort of reestablishing some of these darks here. I can actually maybe work into a more pointed brush, one of these rounds. It doesn't need to be big. If you take care of your round brushes, you can use like a number 9, like one of these. This is like an 8, like that. It's big, but it has a very fine point on it. And if you take care of that brush and don't leave it sitting in the water like this and don't let paint dry on it, this can do all the detail you need. You don't need to go to these like tiny, tiny little 3-haired brushes or these kind of things. It's just not necessary if you take care of your tools. So I do a lot of my detailing with something like, I don't even look at the number when I grab it. I'm just like, oh, there's a round one. And yeah, I've left that one in the water a little bit. It's a little bit bent, but it's still in pretty good shape. Not for long. But we're gonna just reestablish some of the darks here and start to really pay attention to the angles that are taken with each line. If you can also work more into straight lines than curving lines. Our eye has a way of smoothing things and curving them, and then our hand has a way of further smoothing and curving them. So if you can try to counteract a little bit of that and actually chisel and establish a little bit more straight lines as you go. So if I'm doing the edge of this nose, I'll lighten it up a little bit. I don't need it to be that dark. But I'm going to see like this line comes here, and then there's a corner here, and then a corner here, and it comes out. And try to establish that a little bit with more straight lines. It's going to look a lot more realistic. And inevitably, it'll get all finessed and smoothed. And I can also start to just draw out some of these areas here, still looking at shapes, still constantly glancing at my reference photo, but really start to look at the relationships of each of the little smaller shapes, where they connect in, where they detach. Any more questions out there?
What is the most annoying part of painting, and how do you navigate that?
Besides the drying fast and the drying darker, most annoying part of painting probably is my own mental state. My own mind that says, it doesn't look like I want it to look, or it's taking too long, and 400 hours still, or whatever. Like, it's my own little hamster brain that thinks it should be doing something else, or like scrolling on Facebook, or having a snack, or something, like anything but this. And I navigate that by keeping my butt in my chair, keeping my brush in my hand, sometimes, and just keep on painting, like Dory. Just keep painting, and know that that painting is not going to paint itself. I literally have to keep painting if I want it to be finished. Also, it can be very seductive to like, ooh, maybe I'll just start a new painting. I love to do that. I love to start a new painting like the night before a show, or when I have like 15 unfinished paintings staring at me in my studio, and really to like just be diligent and try to finish one. However, sometimes if you're feeling like I don't know where to go on this painting, then setting it aside and working on something that you do know is the right thing to do. Just, I do encourage you, if you're going to set a painting aside, don't do it in a state of anger, annoyance, or disappointment. Because if you step away from that through frustration, you probably are not going to come back to it. So just to like keep following through, and also to stay open to the mystery of like, okay, maybe this painting looks different than it's going to look. Like maybe there's just like, you know, like a big stripe across here or something. Like, okay, it's crooked, but like take a chance. Do something that just wakes you up a little bit. And that may not stay. But like, do something that can reconnect you to your spontaneity, which that will help with the tedium. But if you're setting out to paint 10 doves in realism, you're gonna have to paint 10 doves' feathers in realism, and like, it's just beware of your like ambition. I tell my students this as I'm painting, like, or as I'm teaching, like, you know, there's always going to be more paintings. You don't have to paint all of your spirit animals and all of your ancestors and all of your favorite desserts all into one painting. You can just choose one of those things, and we're only here for 10 days or whatever, however long it is. And so just like cut yourself some slack and be gentle and enjoy the process. It's really, we're so eager to get to the finish line. You know, we just want to like, what's the end of the story look like? I saw a bumper sticker one time that said, I don't want to spoil the ending for you, but it's all going to be okay. And I love that. Like, just relax. Why would we rush to the ending of a painting? If we're considering this like a template for how I walk my life, I don't want to rush to the end of my life. I want to savor it. I want to savor like standing in line at customs, or like sitting in the traffic ferry. You guys are very familiar with that. Like sitting in the ferry traffic and like watching the ravens on the concrete. Like all the little moments that pass us by when we're so in such a hurry to get to the finish line. Of like, oh, I'm so excited for Friday. Oh, I'm so excited for Christmas. I'm so excited to retire. And I've really like started to like, yeah, it can be exciting to finish a painting. But what's really exciting is that like, you know, like, oh, I just did that brush stroke. I don't have to do that brush stroke again. I just did it. Nice, let's move on to another brush stroke. Like, that was nice, I learned a lot from that brush stroke. And you just stay present with each part of the process. It's gonna be a lot more enjoyable. And yeah, annoying. Is being annoyed a choice? I don't know. What do you guys think? Can you choose to not be annoyed? If something's like, if somebody's making like a clicking noise or doing something, or like scuffing their feet while they're walking, like can we choose to not be annoyed at that? Maybe? I'd like to think so. It's an opportunity. Like maybe change your perspective, or like put your headphones in, or like take your power back and like turn your attention. But yeah, like if part of the process is annoying, then put on a podcast, or you know, put on some Simpsons on your computer, sitting there and just like laugh a little bit or do whatever, like distract yourself a little bit, but stay with the process, I think. And yeah.
It's an observation, but I've noticed that you tend to choose, like, I don't know, 80–90% of your paintings, people are staring back right at us. And then sometimes you'll have them looking off to the side, but what inspires you to want to direct gaze, I guess?
Okay, so the question is, why do all of my paintings look the same? No, just kidding. I don't. Each one is totally unique. No, why do I so frequently choose the composition of a forward-facing gaze? And to me, I really like that composition because it literally becomes a mirror. And I like to paint them approximately life-size because it amuses me that when I stand in front of this painting, like, that's me looking back. That's aspects of myself, and I just find it absolutely fantastic and fascinating and fun and all the F words. Freaking awesome. Yeah, I like it. It's interesting to me, and that's probably a lot of like also the influence of, you know, visionary art is often central composition, and sort of like they become like icon paintings, like religious paintings that are very central in their composition and symbolism, and yeah, it's just an aesthetic. And then every once in a while, if I feel like too much repetition with that, I break it and do something different. But yeah, I do see that most of the pieces here, good observation, except for the one piece that we took off the stage. Oh, darn. Could have had proof. Look at the bear. Look at that tiny one in the corner. It's not central composition. Yeah, it's just really, I like it. It feels like, I like the mirror theme.
We have a really question online about why humans?
Why humans? I don't know, ask Michelangelo. Why paint humans? I have just always painted humans, and mostly women. Maybe because I'm a human woman. So it's just like part of my process of understanding myself and understanding the world that I live in. And yeah, it's just, I also feel like, you know, when you meet somebody, and this sort of ties into the question about why a central forward-facing composition. When you meet somebody, you maybe don't shake their hand these days, but maybe you do. You look in their eyes. This is our first reference point. And if there's a painting with a person in it and there's eyes, this will automatically be your entrance point into the painting. And so that's just our most accessible entrance into any work of art, is if there's a human in it, we become that human and we relate to that human, and we tell the narrative of that art in our own experience. So we can look at a painting of a cow and be super moved by it, depending on the lighting and the atmosphere, and, you know, do you love that color of cow or whatever. Like, there's a lot of ways that you can be moved by a painting, a solid painting of red, or a painting of decaying fruit. Like, there's different ways you can be moved by a painting. But I do believe that the easiest access, especially in this day and age when everything's happening so fast, you know, like Instagram, you're like, I just spent like 500 hours on a painting, and people are like, scroll, scroll, scroll. Oh yeah, like, scroll, scroll, scroll. Like I was like, 500 hours, like take 5 seconds. Like, you know, but like in this day and age, things are fast. Things happen fast. And I think that if people can relate, and not that I consciously think this like, oh yes, I must paint humans, and then people will look at my art. Like, this is just always what I painted, but I do believe that if people can relate quickly, if they can enter a painting in a quick way, then they have an opportunity to be transformed or inspired or empowered, changed in some good way by that art, because the door was flung open by like, humans, enter here. Like, it's just an easy access. Whereas cows are a little bit more obscure. Like, what are you saying? Are you saying I'm a cow? Like, I don't know, it's really deep. Or like a blank white painting, you know, did you go to art school? Did you read the title? Like, how do you enter a white painting? Like, it can be very moving if you're in the mood, but it's really easy to walk by that and be bewildered and feel alienated from something that you can't find yourself in immediately. How are we doing for time?
15.
15, okay, we better glaze. Okay, you can see my stripe, crooked. You can also see that I've developed this face more. And with more time, I will obviously take it to this level, and then I will take it to this level. By the time I've gotten here, I've gotten in with that like little round brush, not that little, but little enough, that I can start to really pull out, like looking. We started with the chainsaw carving, like big picture, big shapes, and then got into more and more subtle nuances of like exactly, like look at those little, the way that this little crease of the eyelid actually is like, there's like little wrinkles and little flutters here as it moves across the eyelid, and they're in like this direction. Okay, and then as it goes out here, it's more just like little divots. And like under the nostril here, there's like a little bit more highlight. And being aware not to take my darkest darks all the way dark, and my lightest lights all the way light, like save some. So if you're painting a red rose, don't paint your red, the whole rose, your most saturated red, I would suggest. You can do whatever you want. There's no wrong in art. Like literally, don't have to do anything I tell you. But I would suggest, don't paint it all in super saturated, like cadmium red. Paint it in gray versions of red, and then save your reddest red for the lips of the painting, or for like the crease of where the petals of the rose fold in and touch each other. Like save it, it's special. If you're doing painting eyes and you put like, you know, sparkly, glowy magic across, like, oh yeah, let's do that, that's fun. Okay, so if I come in here and I'm just like, sparkles and all across, in a way, it loses its specialness. You know, like they talk about like cherry blossoms, and the ephemeral nature of cherry blossoms is what makes them beautiful. They're fleeting. We love fireworks and sparkles of the moon on the ocean because they're like, we can't quite grasp them. We can't keep them. They're just like these little magical, like fireflies, like you're just hungry for more, right? Because it's magic, it's fleeting, it's very, very timeless. And so if we go in and just like overstate sparkles in the eyes or in any way, like bring all our whites, to, like highlights to the brightest bright, they cease to be special. So instead, I want to take like all, you know, with this painting or with any of these, like the brightest brights are where I want the viewer to focus. The darkest darks are probably the pupils. It's where I want the viewer to focus. Everything else is just versions of gray because I want to tighten in. So if like this looks like the lens haze, you know, on your iPhone, you can distort things and take the focus away from the edge of the canvas. Here I've like softened. I've softened all these edges. I've softened these guys. These guys don't have any of the same bright brights or dark darks as the central figure because this is the main focus. So save those. And so I'm going to work with that in the eyes. I'm just going to put in like a single bright highlight here. And it's going to have a lot more effect than if I was to put a spattering of sparkles. You can put like multiple light sources, and I'm going to sort of bridge this out. So I'm going to mix a color that's halfway between the dark darks of the iris and the light of the highlight, and I'm just going to sort of fuzz it out a little bit. And I do see in the reference that there's just a sort of secondary one here, but I'm going to keep it rarefied so that it feels special. If you're painting light source, if you're mixing, like let's talk about light source for a second. There's so much information. I was just like, ah. Okay, if you're painting light source into eyes, make sure it matches your light source. And it feels like a no-brainer, but it isn't always. And if you're mixing reference material, like say there's, you know, platypuses are cool. They're really interesting, or like a little piglet or something is sitting on their shoulders. If I'm finding a reference photo for those things, make sure the reference photo matches. Because if you start mixing light sources, it's going to get really wacky really fast. So sometimes that takes flipping the photo in Photoshop or making it up to a certain extent, or, you know, getting to page 65 of Google Images till you finally find the right image to work from, or going down to your neighbor who has a piglet and taking photos yourself. That's fine too. Eyes have their whole own demo, which is super fun, but I will say that I'm going to just highlight a little bit of the iris under here. When you're painting eyes, don't forget that they're eyeballs. They're not eye almonds. So treat them like eyeballs and make sure that they're shaded as such, which is going to be probably more like a vertical shading, tucking in around the corners of the eyes. And the whites of the eyes, especially if you're drawing it and shading in like pencil, the whites of the eyes are surprisingly dark. They're not actually white. It's a totally misname. They're more like blue-gray. So I'm just highlighting here a little bit and here a little bit. Just to add some interest. Eyes are so fun to draw and to paint, and they're absolutely that entrance point that we're talking about. So if you want people to access that painting in a quick and potent way, spending some time on the eyes is important. Making sure that they're the same size and, you know, that they have equal attention. Bring each one up to the same level at the same time. And that goes for everything in general. Say if like I'm painting multiple butterflies here, I would bring all the butterflies, I'd block them all in, and then I'd texture them all, and then I'd glaze them all, and I'd bring them all up at the same level, rather than bringing each one of those things to some level of completion. And I would typically do that with this as well. I would bring all of the faces to the same phase together, like an assembly line, rather than treating them individual like this, because chances are, if I step away for a day or a week or however long until I paint next, I'm not going to be able to match the weight of my brush, the weight of my hand, the lighting, and it's just better to work sort of more methodically.
Do you have a particular color that you use for the whites of the eyes?
Do I have a color that I use for the whites of the eyes? I mix that color with titanium white, a little bit of carbon black, and a little bit of Payne's gray typically. So it's like a bluish gray, and then varying degrees of white mixed in as it comes forward around the eyeball. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go into glazing now. So I have chainsawed and chiseled and refined this figure. Now she's in gray tones, and it's quite developed, but there's still a lot of developing that can happen with the glazing. So this is a fun process. As I always tell my students, do not glaze at night, especially skin tone. So the light is dropping, but at night it's easy to get confused with the artificial lights that penetrate through all the layers of paint, and it's can be misleading, and you can often glaze a lot darker. I don't know how many times I've learned this, like coming back in the morning like, oops, spray tan, or oops, I thought that was a beautiful dark blue and now it's black. So just like really beware of glazing at night and that tendency to be a little bit hasty when you're getting a little bit tired, and to also go heavier. So, okay, so the glaze that I'm using, generally skin tone, depending on your heritage and your level of tannedness or not. But generally, most skin tones, I'd say any skin tone, can be made with the primary colors. Everybody know the primary colors? Red, yellow, blue. Now, for the sake of simplicity and realism, I'm going to use a browned or grayed version of all three of those. I'm using Payne's gray, which is actually not gray at all, totally misnamed, but it's quite a nice neutral blue. I'm using red oxide, which is sort of a brown, earthy tone of red. And I'm using, which yellow am I using here? Yellow ochre. Raw sienna would do the same thing. It's sort of a mustard, yeah, same color, mustardy yellow. So varying degrees of that mixed together, getting it just right. And I'm like drawing in some of these colors, and then I'm mixing into the center of the palette. That blue is just going to gray out. It's just going to sort of neutralize that spray tan effect and give it some coolness. There is a shocking amount of blue in skin tone. So then I'm also using glazing medium. This is my friend, Liquitex glazing medium. It is a polymer medium, so it is pretty much paint with no pigment in it. It looks creamy white, but it dries totally clear. And what that does is it suspends the minerals. If you think of paint as like ground up rocks or minerals, little tiny, tiny, tiny pebbles suspended in goo. So oil paint is suspended in linseed oil. Watercolor is suspended in water. Acrylic is suspended in polymer, plastic. It's suspended in goo, and when you thin it out with water, it spreads out all those little pebbles out onto the canvas. And if you use too much water and no medium to stretch it, no more goo, then those pebbles can easily wipe off. So if you've ever been painting and you're working on an area that you've been working on before and it's lifting up the paint, it's either your paint isn't dry yet, so let it dry, don't try to fix it, it's not going to make it better. Let it dry, work on top after, or you've actually compromised the binder of the paint by adding too much water, and you need to strengthen that with some glazing medium. I prefer this brand, Liquitex, for the glazing medium. The golden equivalent acts nothing like it, so I really recommend this one. It's nice and slippery. It's sort of like a maple syrup, and I'm mixing a little bit of water as well. And I'm mixing it to make a puddle that just feels right, you know? But it's like that. It's like, you know, it's me-ish. It's like, and we're gonna build up many, many layers. So just being patient with this, we want that first pass to be almost inconceivable, or inconceivable. We want it to be almost indistinguishable, invisible. There's a lot of in-ulls. But we just want it to be subtle. Because once it goes on, you can't get it off. And if you start losing your nuances of light and shadow, it's going to be a lot to get it back. So I want to go slow, and knowing that I can build this up. I could put 30 layers of glaze on here to build up the tone that I want, and it's only going to make that color all the richer, all the juicier, rather than just going full gusto, full saturation, and risk going too far. So I'm going to test somewhere I'm not precious about, like down here. Let's see. Okay, that looks good. I would actually develop this whole chest area if that's going to be in the painting. I'll develop that so that it is at the same level as the face, but I just want to show you what this glazing effect does. Keeping a rag in one hand is always handy. I just used cotton sheets from the thrift store and rip them up into little squares, and I usually keep that in one hand. This hand gets really left out sometimes. It's like, what can I do? So it's nice to hold something in it. And I'm just gonna paint in over top of my whole painting, except for the eyes. If there was eyes in this, I wouldn't glaze over the eyes. And I'm gonna work with the natural borders of the face or of the figure wherever I'm glazing. And also, one of these annoying things about acrylic is that as it starts to dry, if it's not quite dry and you start to paint over top of it, it will lift up areas and create a whole world of pain of you trying to blend things into something that's already started to dry. Very annoying. So what you want to do is let it do its thing. It's acrylic. Let it dry. It dries fast, remember? It's great. So I'm going to work in this area. Now I'm going to let that dry. I'm not going to start trying to come back over here and work this. I'm going to actually just let that dry. I'm going to start working down here. I'm working quickly and deliberately, but not hastily. And go right over the lips. I'm using one of my nice fuzzy brushes that I've totally destroyed, but now it just serves me in different ways. It's awesome. And you can see it starts to subtly, it's hard to maybe see in this light, but you can see it's subtly changing the skin tone. I can go a little bit heavier around the nose. If I want to retain some of this highlight, I can actually just lift it off a little bit with my rag, or sometimes I use my finger. And I don't want to rub, because that actually pushes the paint into the grains of the canvas. I want to dab and lift, and that will take off maybe a third of the paint, and it really helps just soften whatever it is that I've put down on there. So see how that just subtly tints it. As I work in around the cheeks, the nose, the mouth, these are going to be redder areas, so I can mix in a little bit more of the red oxide. Oh, I definitely want to make sure that that's dry before I work back into it. So I'll just keep working over here, especially the lips. The face does have subtle fields of color, of general undertones. The bottom is generally a cooler bluish. Like, it's all very subtle. Don't take me literal on this and just make like stripes across the face. But the bottom third does take on a bluer tone, especially men, because their beards would be under their skin. It's cooler. It's also against the jawline, so you see the bone a little bit through. The middle tends to be redder. This is pinky. It's around the nose, the cheeks. There's a lot more blood vessels here, a lot more moisture and like heat moving through. And then around the forehead is yellow. It's stretched across the bone of the skull, and you can actually see the yellow of this bone underneath. And so if you keep those in mind as you're working, that can help with your glazing. Don't go overboard with that. You don't need to like really spell it out. But if you keep that in mind as a rule, it can help inform where you make the glazes stronger or more subtle. Any questions about glazing? Is it matte, glossy, or satin? This one is quite glossy. However, if you prefer a matte finish, I would say still use this. Just don't worry about that gloss, because you can neutralize it all with a matte varnish at the end. And regardless of whether you use glazing medium or not, every paint will have a different sheen quality. Like, umbers tend to be very dull and matte, whereas phthalos tend to be very shiny and glossy. So every paint is going to be different. And so as you look at your painting from the side and it catches the light, you're going to notice it's quite spotty. You do want to varnish your paintings both for protection as well as for that overall unification at the end anyway. So then you can choose your semi-gloss or your matte or your gloss or whatever. I usually choose like a semi-gloss or satin. I like a little bit of sheen, but I don't want it to be totally distracting from the overall painting. It can be just too shiny. However, matte colors, like if you're at the beach and you have a stone and you like lick it, or you put it in the water and the color pops out, or if you follow the hashtag on Instagram, varnish porn, it's very fun. It's very sexy. It's like when people are varnishing their paintings, and it's amazing how matte when they're just matte finish and they put this shine on top, all the colors pop. The blacks go super black and everything just gets really luscious. So yeah, a little bit of shine will only make your colors even more bright and luscious and delicious. So, but it's personal taste. Some people really like frames, some people don't. Some people like gloss, some people don't. Everybody likes kittens though, right? And platypuses.
The second question for today is, do you wait to varnish your paintings?
Do you wait to varnish your painting?
How long?
How long do you wait to varnish your painting? When I finish a painting, I let it sit in my studio and I get to know it for a few days, sometimes up to a week. And I'm like, I just want to share it. I just want to like take a photo and make stickers and put it online and, you know. But I also know that I've been really close to it for a long time, like really close. And so just like the idea of perspective in our own lives, you know how you like look back on times of your life and like, oh my God, if only I could see from this perspective, like that situation, I would have so much more input. And so sometimes you just need perspective with a painting. And you like, so I literally put it on the other side of my studio and I just live with it for a few days. And then usually there's some finessing and some tweaking of like, oh, I see that eyelid is just a little bit too bright, and really being patient with that. And so I varnish it once it tells me it's finished. You know when a painting's finished. People say, how do you know when a painting's finished? It tells you. It's also like, I remember my art school teacher said, a painting is never finished, it's only released. I think he said abandoned, but I prefer released. It's just, you let it go. You have to let it go at some point. So take it as far as you can take it. Love it as much as you can love it. Give it like the honor of your attention and intention to the best of your ability, and then release it, and know that you're probably going to look back on it one day and say it's crap, because your skill level is going to advance, and that's okay. But you painted that to the best of your ability at that time, so you have to honor the person that you were at that time, and you just keep going forward and making better paintings. And that's totally okay. It's just part of it. I'm going to take some pure red oxide here, and I'm just going to, I'm going to mix it a little bit. Just bring it into some of these creases, just to warm up some of these areas where skin is on skin, where it's really full of blood and alive. Do I have any exercises for taking care of your wrists? Well, I'd say definitely try not to strain it very much to begin with, because if you're painting at an uncomfortable angle, that's going to put a lot of unnecessary strain on it. So just to be mindful of like keeping your wrists straight. Use a maul stick if you want. Like sometimes I use like a paintbrush like this, and I rest on here if I need to support my wrist. But for like actually just caring for it, like I've been told that I have scar tissue in here from clutching a brush a lot. It's very real. Like I know a tattoo artist that had to have that muscle removed. Like it's really, you must be careful with your tools. And so like this is a good one, and rotating it like this. There's also one that you move like this and all the way up and all the way down with extended arms, and that you can feel it sort of stretches all up into your arms here, bending your wrists back like this and forward, and just being gentle. Another, like rather than massaging in here with your fingers, which is then just straining your fingers more, you can use actually the flat part of your arm, and if you rest it on the table or on your leg and you just slide up and down with the flat of your arm, that can really help work out some of those tight parts of your body. Yeah. I do yoga every day. No, I don't. Only corpse pose in bed. Time is up. Oh, yeah, okay. I am complete, and I thank you all so much for your questions and for your attention and for listening to me blather and make bad jokes. Do you guys know what Salvador Dali eats for breakfast? Cereal. Thank you. Good pleasure. And then invite Sophia up here for one more song. I will hand over this tiny but powerful microphone. And I thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. tune. Thank you again, Autumn. It's so nice to learn from you. In the spirit of balance, as that was a big theme tonight, I'm going to share one of mine. The one that I shared earlier is a cover by Think, which I've been learning and falling in love with. And this is an original of mine. Watching the lights, the light, turn the mountains to gold. Silence in my mind. Watching the lights, the light, turn the mountains to gold. Silence in my mind. As day returns to night, cycles within time. Remind us everything must change, opening our eyes to seek a clearer way. Ooh, hey, 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 hey. The night has fallen for the beauty of the stars quietly coming in the darkest hour before the dawn. Spirit within form, rest in the temple of my heart. The currents of her song, bringing wisdom from above. Hey, 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 ooh, ooh, ooh. Watching the lights, the light, turn the mountains to gold. Silence in my mind as day returns to night. Cycles within time. Remind us everything must change, opening our eyes to seek a clearer way of balance, of balance, of balance within, oh balance, oh balance, balance within. Thank you, Sid.
You said one word.
Yeah.